Hey guys, how we doing? Back in another video from Annie News. Excuse me, my nose is so bunged up right now. And we are on how Cocytus changed throughout the story of Overlord. So this is basically a part 2 of who is Cocytus. He hasn't done the how strong is yet, I do believe. I like these Annie News videos when I talk about Overlord characters. That's what got me started on the channel, so as soon as I see one of them, I'm like, So let's check it out, let's see what he's got to say in this one, shall we?
Cocytus is one of the few NPC characters in Overlord that have their own subplot. There's subtle elements that were placed throughout the Lizardman arc of Season 2 that allowed him to develop into something beyond Takemikazuchi or Ainz's expectations. So let's see
it was
how
cool
exactly
when he fought the
this
Lizardmen,
happened
like.
as we take a look at everything else that went into making Cocytus who he is. You may recall that Cocytus' name refers to the 9th layer of Hell, the frozen lake known as Cocytus, with the lake itself frozen solid, entombing any and all traitors and oathbreakers within its icy grasp, which is rather strange considering that loyalty and honor are fairly central to Cocytus' character, especially the part about being loyal to his lord. So I think the aspect that his name draws from is more in the sense that Cocytus would be very keen to punish traitors. But then again, most of the Guardians would be. After all, they all share that same undying loyalty to the Supreme Ones. And it's not like warrior Takemikazuchi could have known that when making Cocytus. So it remains a bit of a mystery as to where the NPC's loyalty comes from exactly, even to Ainz. Personally, our theory is that it's largely a function of the fact that as former NPCs, they were flagged as allied characters not only for the purposes of friendly fire, but also so that they would obey any command given to them by the guild members.
Interesting.
So when they were turned into these living creatures and gained their sentience, they also carried this aspect forward as this absolute, unquestioning loyalty. However, if you look carefully, you can still see the difference between characters like Cocytus, Sebas, and Albedo, who were specifically written by their creators to embody a strong degree of loyalty and duty, in comparison to characters like Aura, Mare, Pandora's actor, or Lupus Regina, who are quite a bit more free-spirited in their
she goes off and does all sorts, doesn't she? Like, just keep an eye on the town and that.
Out of all of them, Cocytus could very well be described as one of the most loyal NPCs, insofar as he simply tries to do exactly as he's told with no real interpretation. But, as we'll see in just a minute, this is the very opposite of what Ainz actually wants. First, let's talk about Cocytus' morality. His karma rating is in the neutral range, but leaning slightly more towards the good side at plus 50. Above 100 or below negative 100 seems to be the point at which a character begins to significantly demonstrate evil or good tendencies, with truly vile personalities like Albedo and Demiurge capping at negative 500.
Damn.
With neutrality, it's a bit of a catch-all for pragmatists who look out for themselves and the people that they care about, encompassing those who are ideologically committed to being impartial or neutral, as well as people with interests or priorities that don't neatly fall into a traditional good or evil dichotomy. Cocytus is an example of the latter. As we know, he is first and foremost a warrior, and as such respects others with martial prowess and skill, especially since the Bushido code that he seems to embody so closely emphasizes a certain degree of compassion and kindness, making Cocytus lean a bit more towards that good alignment. Unlike Sebas, he probably won't twist or defy orders to help out the innocent, or even hunt down evil people with a furious vengeance. But he will be as nice, honest, and reasonable as his orders allow him to be. Which leads us to his character arc. Much like some of the other NPCs like Shaltir, Sebas, and even arguably Albedo, Cocytus experiences a subtle conflict between how he was originally created and his loyalty to the Supreme Ones. These character arcs can be quite difficult to pick up on in the anime, mostly due to the light novel's general lack of focus on them in comparison to more traditional dramas. So these arcs tend to get lost in the details when the anime adaptation comes around. What they're meant to be are interesting little subplots that the anime really doesn't have time to delve into, if at all. I mean, they only have 4 or so episodes for like 300 pages of each volume of the light novel.
Wow.
On top of that, the NPCs are often designed to have quirky personalities to suit Overlord's brand of dark humor. They don't necessarily need actual character arcs if they're instead just used as comedic devices. On the other hand, NPCs like Sebas and Cocytus, who aren't very comedic at all, are often more in need of these character arcs to keep them interesting. And in the case of
really
Cocytus,
much funny stuff you can do with
his sense of morality and samurai trope personality to even the details of his creator play into it. The defining moment for Cocytus came in Volume 4, the Lizardmen Heroes arc, He had been told by Ainz to lead an army against the Lizardmen, but to not take the field himself. And like a dutiful samurai, he obeyed his lord, even
Yeah.
if he wasn't very good at following through with the orders he was given. And as a result, the Lizardmen rallied and were able to come up with a hard-fought victory. It wasn't pretty, though. Former enemies banded together under one loose banner, employing desperate gambits and sacrificing many lives as they all fought to the death. But in the end, they did defeat Cocytus' army, leaving him no choice but to return to Ainz ashamed.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for his loss was because of the usual NPC hubris. Cocytus simply presumed that whatever forces Ainz gave him would be sufficient to annihilate the Lizardmen, believing that because it was the Supreme One who'd ordered it, the plan was infallible, as well as assuming that the NPCs and forces of Nazarick were inherently superior to the inferior life forms of the New World. It was also in part to Cocytus just not being very bright. Demiurge had concluded that this was a test of Cocytus' competence, coming to the conclusion that Ainz had deliberately assigned him forces that were incapable of simply steamrolling all over the Lizardmen. But Cocytus wasn't as bright as Demiurge, and he couldn't conceive the possibility that Ainz may have just given him this task as a test. Now, losing on purpose isn't exactly something an honorable samurai would try and do. I mean, even after Demiurge pointed out that Ainz may have intended for him to lose the battle, Cocytus still felt a strong sense of shame and regret for his failure. Fortunately for both Cocytus and Ainz, the army was mainly comprised of weak skeletons called
they didn't
which
lose a
regularly
lot of
respawned in
important
Nazarick
stuff
on a daily basis. And so, despite losing the entire army, the cost of the operation was effectively nil, not accounting for the Elder Lich Igaba that Ainz had created as an experiment. This person was heavily implied to be one of the captured Sunlight Scripture soldiers from Season 1.
Oh right, that's
in any
cool.
Case, whether all of them died or none of them did, the effect on Ainz or Nazarick would be inconsequential. So, Ainz didn't care too much whether Cocytus won or lost. He knew Cocytus wasn't a military expert. In fact, his motivation with the entire campaign was basically just to see if NPCs could learn. See, back in
how they could evolve in that.
improvements in skill, ability, and knowledge was largely tracked with what you'd expect. Experience points. You
So can the
gained
NPCs
power
do it?
acquiring XP to increase your level and improve specific classes. By contrast, the New World was a bit of a mystery. Experience points were largely
He's very clever in
abstraction and
testing the new
simplification
world,
from reality.
seeing how it
So
works.
Ainz wondered how these rules differed in the New World. How were they the same? It would seem ridiculous that a wizard who spent all their life studying magic would still be level 1 since they've never killed any monsters. More importantly, Ainz wondered whether he, or any of the other level 100 NPCs for that matter, could even increase their level beyond the level 100 cap that was placed in Natrism. And if he couldn't gain experience, did that mean he wouldn't be able to learn or get better at anything? His adventuring as Momon was part of an experiment to find that out himself. But he also wanted to see if the rules were any different for the NPCs. And so, Ainz did what any MMO gamer would do. Go find some monsters to kill.
And
That
test
was
out
how
the
it normally
theories,
worked in
yeah.
Yggdrasil. Fight monsters, gain XP, acquire some loot, have some fun. Though, he didn't expect to actually get any XP or useful loot from the Lizardmen. He merely viewed them as what were effectively toys for his amusement. Not only because his undead race prevents him from having any kind of empathy, but monsters in MMOs are just a means to an end. And naturally, Ainz brought that attitude into the New World. In this case, he saw them as an opportunity to learn about the New World's mechanics, nothing more. But as we saw, things are never so simple.
Nope.
The Lizardmen are neither mindless monsters, nor are they evil creatures who exist to be farmed for loot or rewards. They are each their own individual, coming together to form a civilization, a culture. And with that comes their own hopes, dreams, conflicts, and so on. They share far more in common with humans than even Ainz does. The title of the volume of their arc, The Lizardman Heroes, alludes to the fundamental nature of it. They are the protagonists of their own heroic struggle against a terrifying overlord.
Yeah, it does seem
Ask
that way. It was
yourself,
really weird. It was
if
like,
the Lizardmen were a far more
watching the
humanoid-looking
bad
race, and
guys.
we were following things from their perspective, would we not have a radically different outlook on the events? The differing audience reactions to the Tomb Invasion arc versus the Lizardmen arc are certainly interesting in that respect. Many more of you started to realize that Ainz might just be the bad guy when he slaughtered all the adventurers. But it should have become apparent that this was the case when he attempted to genocide an entire species for an experiment.
Yeah.
Now, though many in the audience did not sympathize very heavily with the Lizardmen, Cocytus certainly did. And so, in defiance of Ainz's direct orders, and despite the fact that he had just shamed himself, Cocytus requested that the Lizardmen be spared. To request something from one of the Supreme Ones is practically already a grave insult. After all, as far as the NPCs are concerned, they exist only to serve the Supreme One's will. And yet, Cocytus was willing to defy it, even after failing to accomplish Ainz's orders. Perhaps it was in part because the Lizardmen were so sympathetic. Part of Bushido emphasizes having a righteous and benevolent character. Though, unlike the more traditional Western superhero morality that Touchme instilled into Sebas's character, this doesn't necessarily mean standing up against villains or ignoring orders to protect the innocent. Even if a samurai was loyal to an imperialist, warmongering lord, they would still have to follow their orders. The only caveat is that the warrior ought to behave respectfully and gracefully while doing so, trying the best they can to avoid the unnecessary bloodshed of innocents, as well as assist those victimized by the war, such as orphans. But this wasn't the only reason he didn't want them to die. The primary reason why Cocytus was so invested in the Lizardmen's fate was that he respected them. Remember, Bushido was about the balance between martial prowess and wisdom. Being able to master your skills at fighting is just as important as being honorable and wise. And so, when the Lizardmen rallied to come back against all possible odds, Cocytus, as a fellow warrior, was greatly impressed by their tenacity, spirit, and skill. And perhaps he inherited the part of his creator, Takemikazuchi, that romanticized facing down impossible odds, and either overcoming them with skill and luck, or going out in a blaze of glory. I mean, there's no doubt that Takemikazuchi would have loved to see the Lizardmen's battle against Nazarick.
Yeah.
Hell, he would have been the first to be rooting for their victory. So, this is likely another example of a mechanic that an NPC inadvertently inherited from their creator's personality traits. Of course, just because Cocytus had asked him, that doesn't mean that Ainz would agree. You might be forgiven for thinking that conquering Lizardmen was all part of Ainz's master plan. After all, even Demiurge seemed convinced that everything had taken place as Ainz had foreseen.
Yeah.
But
All
Overlord's signature
according to
humor
plan.
typically entails Ainz and his NPCs misinterpreting each other. And so, in reality, Ainz couldn't have cared less about what happened to them. Like I said before, he saw them as monsters who existed only for his personal enjoyment. And so, when Cocytus made the request to save them, he was thoroughly shocked, surprised even, and a little concerned that Cocytus seemed to be empathizing with the Lizardmen, but ultimately very excited. Remember, Ainz's
It's still a
primary
test. He wants to
motivation
know
was to see the
how everything
NPCs
works.
learn
Yeah.
and improve.
It's cool.
But the first step towards that would require them to have to think for themselves. Normally, their reaction was simply to obey whatever commands
Just
or
like,
plans
"Yes,
Ainz
master."
came up with. And rarely did they interject with better ideas. This was concerning to Ainz, since his
He
mind was
needs-
still that of a human and was
Yeah.
not really capable
He
of
needs
living
people
up
to
to the
help
lofty
him.
expectations they set for him. Cocytus in particular was notorious for this, often telling others and even Ainz that he viewed himself as little more than a sword, that his job was not to think, but to cut down whatever he swung his sword
I do
at.
not think I do.
However, Ainz had repeatedly told the Guardians to disregard this way of thinking, and try to become more than that. He wanted them to be more independent, become able to think for themselves. So, when Cocytus made his request, Ainz was more than eager to hear his reasoning. What was the basis behind it? What benefit could it bring to Nazarick? Perhaps Cocytus saw something more than just beings to act as an experience farm. Of course, Cocytus's motivation was not based on how they could be useful to Nazarick. He felt embarrassed and ashamed to admit that it was simply to honor them as warriors.
Yes.
Try as he might, he couldn't come up with a useful purpose for them. With regards to their militaristic capabilities, they would provide us
So cool when he
no
got down
value.
there
I
for
mean,
them.
the bulk of Nazarick's armies were comprised of considerably stronger undead troops. So Ainz then suggested massacring them and using their corpses for necromancy experiments, to which Cocytus couldn't justifiably claim that they'd be more useful alive than as undead slaves, especially since the warriors Ainz could use their bodies to create were individually much more powerful than any Lizardman. If not for the intervention of Demiurge, who could articulate a better case, the Lizardmen might not have made it past mid-second season.
That's interesting.
Of course, it's not as if Demiurge did so out of the kindness of his heart. He seemed to think that this was some kind of test from Ainz that the NPCs had to overcome, and so he racked his brain trying to come up with potential uses for them, ultimately settling on the idea of using the Lizardmen as a test case for ruling other species. After all, it would be good practice for Ainz's impending world of domination. Well, that's what Demiurge thought anyway. And so, rather than be tasked with exterminating them, Cocytus was ultimately put in command of them, told to rule them without the use of terror tactics. Ainz would go on to resurrect a small handful of those who
bring
died
them
in the
back,
battle,
yeah.
including several of the chieftains, using the promise of resurrection and future support as a carrot to dangle in front of them. It was through this that Cocytus was basically appointed governor and administrator of Ainz's new Lizardmen province. and he would go on to be a fairly good administrator of the tribe. Most of his time was spent leading them on subjugation missions against other demi-human tribes in the area, such as the Toadmen. While Nazarick's undead armies could no doubt conquer them in mere days, perhaps Cocytus enjoyed the challenge of leading the relatively weak Lizardmen against other demi-human tribes who matched their strength.
Sounds
Maybe Ainz had told him to use this opportunity to continue to practice leading troops in battle. Or perhaps he was searching for a way for the Lizardmen to make useful contributions in the army and soon-to-be nation of Nazarick. Though it was probably a combination of all of these factors. Now, although he was their new leader, Cocytus's policy was to interact with the Lizardmen in a friendly, respectful manner, presumably in order to avoid fostering resentment. Fortunately, the Lizardman race had a culture of tribal conflict, wherein tribes would conquer and be conquered by other tribes on a regular basis, mostly as a result of resource or territorial battles. So the Lizardmen were able to adapt fairly quickly to this new arrangement, and Cocytus effectively assumed the role of tribal chieftain. Of course, treating a conquered civilian populace with respect and dignity is also something that you'd expect from a samurai practicing Bushido. So you might say it was simply in Cocytus's nature to maintain such a camaraderie with his subordinates. Aside from leading them into war, Cocytus was also in charge of the day-to-day operations and decisions. The first major order of business was to relocate the various tribes into one large village. As a new colony of Nazarick, the Lizardmen were provided with appropriate support, including golems to help build infrastructure like walls and watchtowers,
which is really cool.
A small detachment of elite Nazarick Old Guarders and Nazarick skeleton troops to defend their settlement, as well as temporary food support. If you'll recall, the dwindling fish population was a minor plot point early on during the Lizardman arc, and Ainz freezing the entire lake solid probably didn't help much in that regard. Fortunately, the guild owned a minor magical artifact called Dogda's Cauldron, which could produce any kind of food one requested in exchange for a small amount of Yggdrasil gold.
That's cool.
So this is what was used to help provide for them in the short term. As for the end goal, the Lizardmen were supposed to become self-sufficient, and with Dogda's Cauldron, they were able to quickly begin construction of various fish farms under Cocytus's direction. This support wasn't just a benevolent charity, though. The Lizardmen were expected to worship Ainz as their new god, and a life-sized statue of him was placed at the center of the village, to be administered and tended to by their highest-ranking druids. Offerings such as fish and flowers were placed at the foot of the statue, worthless to both Ainz and Nazarick, of course, but the size and rarity of the offerings were a symbol of the Lizardmen's commitment and dedication. Each of the Lizardmen wore necklaces with an emblem depicting the insignia of Ainz.
That's cool.
This effectively marked them as property of Nazarick, as well as was a promise of protection. Any minion of Nazarick would know that those wearing it were under its dominion and should not be harmed. Furthermore, others who damaged Nazarick's property would be committing an offense of the highest order against the Supreme.
So if you attack the Lizardmen,
they would be met with the appropriate retribution. Ultimately, the message was clear. Oppose Nazarick and be destroyed by its overwhelming power. Worship and love Ainz, and be the beneficiary of his mercy and kindness. And it was Cocytus who was by and large the one to come up with and implement the majority of these ideas. To one whose only concern before now was how best to be the ideal sword for Ainz, having to effectively become a governor of a province was a big change for him. Many of the common tropes Cocytus was based off of ended up being subverted. Like, rather than join under an opponent after his loss, it was Cocytus who took the Lizardmen under his wing as subordinates. Rather than simply being a loyal underling whose only thought was how best to follow orders and cut down his foes, he had to become a great leader, learn skills of the diplomat, and solve domestic problems. Overall, perhaps he finds his new job far more enjoyable than simply doing what he was told to. But yeah, that's how Cocytus became this independent subject.
That is kind of cool, actually, when you look at everything that happened to him.
In the surrounding area. As I mentioned in the beginning, he's one of the few NPCs that gets a noticeable subplot resulting in a more well-developed
no one else has got anything else going on. I mean, Sebas had his whole little story
Next
going
we're
on.
going to talk about how strong he is.
Yes.
So be sure to keep an eye out for that video, along with some other Danmachi and New Fate content. Now, before I go, I'd like to thank Crunchyroll once again for sponsoring this video. Don't forget, you can use crunchyroll.com/anynews or the link in the description to get a 14-day free trial of Crunchyroll Premium today. And feel free to let me know in the comments what anime you plan on watching once you're there. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao.
Yeah, Cocytus does seem to have more of an actual character growth than any of the other NPCs. Like I said though, Sebas had his little side story with the girl and that, but then everyone else doesn't seem to have a subplot with much depth going on. Yeah, I like Cocytus, who's cool. I can't wait to see how strong he is. That's going to be a good one. But until then, thank you guys very much for watching. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments down below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. I'll see you guys. Here's all you guys next time.